Hi guys, so last time we looked at the contralto, which is a really rare voice type. Today we'll be looking at the mezzo soprano. You'll definitely have heard this one before, it's far more common. So what is it? So a mezzo soprano is the middle female voice type, and just like a baritone, the middle male voice type, it can be kind of difficult to actually identify sometimes, as they can sometimes have just a regular middle range. They can sometimes sound kind of low and heavy, almost like a contralto. So like Adele, who is often mislabeled as an alto but isn't quite an alto, and they can sometimes sound a little bit higher, like Catherine Jenkins, who's an opera singer. She sounds almost soprano-like, but not quite. They don't quite have the same ease and lightness in the high aspect of their voice like a soprano does, but they are a little bit tricky to identify. They do have kind of characteristics of an alto, sometimes of a soprano, or sometimes just of a mezzo soprano. So we'll have to look into what actually you can use to identify a mezzo soprano on their own, but they can be a little bit tricky sometimes. Okay, so in their own right, how do you identify a mezzo soprano? So a mezzo soprano obviously has a higher voice. It's a female voice type. The voices are higher than all men and all altos. They often have a really strong, heavy-ish, but not mega dark tone, particularly in the middle of their range is where they sing the most often. And you can really tell them as a soprano because they have an easy time in their upper belt range. So kind of above the B4, C5, D5 sort of area, this is where mezzo soprano's voice can really shine. It's really powerful and really strong. As I say, it has a heaviness that a soprano voice doesn't have, but it's not quite as heavy as an alto, hence why they have a bit more ease in this register. Due to the combined heaviness and also higher placement of their voice, they can sing in this fifth octave and the upper fourth octave really well, sound really powerful, and their belts sound really at ease and really comfortable here, and they sound kind of a little bit more comfortable than alto would in this sort of area. Whereas an alto's absolute upper belt range is in this sort of area, a mezzo can go a little bit higher and sounds a bit more comfortable. As I say, most mezzos have some ability in the fifth octave. They can get up there, they can mix really well, they can belt really strong. And as I say, because their voices are heavier but also higher, this combines to create a really powerful, pinging, belt, beautiful sound up in this top part of their range, in their upper chest, upper belt range. It is also worth mentioning some mezzo sopranos do have some ability in the third octave. They can kind of get down to relatively low notes, not all that many. They don't really sing down here too often, and they won't have the resonance and the power that an alto would, and certainly not that a man would. They don't really practice this range all that often, but some can get kind of low in it and kind of can use it a little bit. As I say, they excel more in the fourth octave where their voice sounds really strong and really at ease. Unlike an alto, who obviously they sound powerful in the fourth octave, F4, G4, they're sounding really powerful because they're putting a lot of weight into it. A mezzo soprano sounds way more at ease here. It's not as big a note, their bigger notes are a little bit later on because their voice is obviously at a higher place setting. But yeah, so they can do the fifth octave okay, their fourth octave is really powerful, really bright and really strong and really heavy, and the third octave occasionally can sound pretty decent and can have some sort of projection, not really below an A3, G3 sort of area. Someone like Beyonce she can get really low into the second octave, so it can happen, but the majority of mezzo-sopranos' voices work really well in the fourth and fifth octave, and their third are kind of a bit lackluster, but they do have them sometimes. Confusing, I know. Another way to identify a mezzo-soprano voice is by comparison. So do you remember in the contralto episode where we showed you Cher's B flat 4? So let's listen to Lady Gaga in mezzo-soprano hitting the same note. Okay, did you hear the difference? So Cher's note was absolute top of her voice. She was belting her highest note or somewhere near her highest note and it sounded really enormous. Whereas Lady Gaga's, it was a big-ish note, but it sounded like she had way more room to go up. It wasn't like massively hard for her, and it was pretty comfortable. Obviously, it was kind of towards the top end, but there was still room to grow, whereas Cher's was at the absolute top of her range. So that is a good way to show it. A mezzo-soprano has got a really strong fourth octave, upper fourth octave, but they find it quite easy and they have placement to go higher. Whereas the alto basically stop at this range because that's where their chest voice really stops and their mix really stops. So it's a good way to compare. Just Cher's note, which was absolute full top of a range B flat 4, whereas the mezzo soprano Lady Gaga's was kind of high, pretty easy, and had room to go up. So yeah, to summarise, a mezzo soprano has a really high, strong belt range in the upper fourth to lower fifth octave. Okay, so what is the average vocal range for a mezzo-soprano? Now, as with all the sources you'll kind of see, they focus more on the head voice aspect of it and include head voice because they have a more focus on the classical singing style. So they put it really an A3 to an A5, and while some mezzos are capable of this, I'm going to use just a modal voice as I have been through the whole series, and I will say an A3 to an F5. Most mezzos could probably mix this high and still sustain really strong belt notes up to the F5, obviously with a mixed coordination, you couldn't build chest voice up this high. I wouldn't say many could go a great deal higher. Some could, like a Beyonce could, because Beyonce is just broken. But most people on F5 would be a pretty good low note. It's also worth mentioning, if you look at the vocal range of a lot of popular singers, they'll be able to go way below this A3, but it'll have a lack of projection, lack of power, and kind of it won't really fit into the style of their voice. So for me, your average mezzo soprano that's just learning to sing or just finding their range, without practicing their lower end too much, will kind of be around the A3, maybe a little bit lower, but they won't be able to project too much down here or have a great deal of resonance down here, because it's just not where their voice is practiced or where it's particularly suited. So most of them will kind of sing around the A3 as a low note or a comfortable low note. Some can get lower, and a lot of people can actually hit lower notes, but they're not exactly notes, they're not great, they're just kind of a slight lower extension. So I would say an A3 is a pretty good low note for most mezzo sopranos. As I say, some can get lower, but the majority, if they don't practice their low notes, will be comfortable around this sort of range. Okay, so a mezzo-soprano's real vocal strength is in their upper to mid chest voice. Because they have the heavier tone that they can bring up to the higher pitches, we're looking at the kind of F4 to C5, they have real ease here, real strength and real projection. As I say, they can bring up this heavier weight and heavier tone to these higher extension notes, and they sound absolutely unbelievable. They have a strength and resonance that you almost won't believe, because this is where their voice really truly shines, and it has an abundance of power a lot of the time and can sound enormous. An upper belt range also of mezzo soprano can sound quite good. Unlike an alto that can kind of maybe belt to a D5 if they're on a good day, a mezzo can often sing a lot higher as these mega high E5, F5 sort of notes. They can sound really resonant, really powerful, and really good. So as I say, their main vocal strengths are really in their upper chest belt, upper chest range, upper chest belt, because it has the power and the ease to bring this heavier voice up really high, and then the kind of power and flexibility and agility in the upper to mid fifth octave, where an alto would struggle, a soprano would sound good, but a mezzo soprano would sound really strong, because that's where their weight of their voice and the heaviness and the agility all come together to culminate in this beautiful sound. Another place a mezzo soprano is really good is in the head voice. So, unlike a man whose head voice you have to get really high in the fifth octave, you have to either push quite a lot, use a lot of air, or project, or use a mass placed head voice, or add more of a connection or more of a mix. Obviously, because a woman's voice sits higher, their head voice starts later. So, whereas a man for a G5 or an A5 would have to really push hard, or go really airy, or just do something to get in this octave because it's not natural for us necessarily, it's a very high extension. A woman's head voice will sit just above this because their chest range sits so high, so they can probably hit really gentle, beautiful A5s and G5s, whereas we would have to try really hard and really powerful to get to those notes, like a mass placed head voice, like a Brendan Urie or a Damash. They'd sound big and whiny, and that has its place, its own right. But if you want a really gentle, beautiful, high head voice, not almost falsetto sounding up at this pitch, generally women are the places people that can do these, because obviously their head voice just starts later, so they can get this area sound up a bit higher. Okay, so most mezzo-sopranos' weakest area of their voice is their low notes. The same can be said for a soprano. Because they're a female voice type and their voices just sit higher and have more ease in this upper mid sort of range, their low notes often leave a lot to be desired because they don't have much projection or resonance or power or practice down here. Now, unless you have a particularly dark timbre as a mezzo-soprano, like a Beyonce, who can get, I believe, to an F2 or a G2, which is absolutely absurd for a female voice. That is really, really low. She's just a particularly special singer though, isn't she? Let's be honest. The majority of female singers won't be able to get a huge amount lower than the third octave. A3 comfortably, G3, F3 maybe, and then really quiet to go a lot lower. As I say, they can sometimes get lower than the A3, but that's where it would still kind of have projection and ease. Most women or female singing voices won't have any sort of real ability down here. They won't use it much, they won't project down here much, and they won't actually bother playing around with it as much as they would their upper range, because that's where all the impressive stuff is. That's where all their eases, all their comfortable notes are, and that's what sells high notes. So why would they sing down here if they can sing up there? Sure, it'd be comfortable-ish, but they'd be much more comfortable on the D4, E4 sort of areas of low note, and that'd just be way easier for them. So as I say, their main vocal strengths are in the upper belt range or the mid to high chest voice, and their weaker notes are kind of their lower extension because they just don't use it that much. Okay, so this is where I do subcategories, but the subcategories for a mezzo-soprano are essentially exactly the same as an alto, so I'll kind of run quickly through them again, but I won't do the thing on screen and all that stuff. So you've got the coloratura mezzo-soprano, which are the ones who have kind of the higher, lighter range, that can do really powerful high notes and have more of an ease sustaining really high notes. They can also kind of do decent low notes as well, and often have to flip between this lower part and this higher part. that's mainly an opera, but yeah, they have kind of a higher sitting, more agile voice. You got the lyric mezzo soprano, which is kind of the more common one, where again they have a lighter tone and they can do decent high notes and stuff, but they're not quite as agile in their upper range as the coloratura, and they don't quite sound as pinging up at the top range. They're more of a common mezzo soprano voice. Then you got the dramatic mezzo soprano, which is kind of really big and powerful. It has a deeper, thicker tone. It has a really more heavy, smoky, weightier middle voice. And as I say, their voices are more powerful, they're more big, and they've got kind of more of a robust feeling to them. That's basically what it means. Lyric means light, kind of, and dramatic means heavy, kind of, and then coloratura means agile, kind of. Okay, so where would you find a mezzo soprano in the music industry? Everywhere. Because their voices are higher sitting, and the high notes really sell, as we say, you find them in pop music all the time. There's several opera parts of mezzo soprano. You will hear them everywhere. You'll have heard mezzo sopranos a lot. They're a pretty common voice type, not the most common, that is a soprano, as I'll get to next episode, but there are a lot of mezzo sopranos out there, and due to the fact that their voices are strong and high, yeah, you'll hear them all the time. So there's no reason that you wouldn't have heard one before, and they are in all facets of music, and you won't have any trouble finding one. Okay, so for the examples, let's look at a lower sitting mezzo soprano, a middle mezzo soprano, and a higher sitting mezzo soprano. So the lower one we'll go for is Adele. Now, as I say, she's often mislabeled a contralto, but she has a really dark, thick, powerful mezzo soprano tone.
Don't forget me, I beg, I remember you said
Okay, second, Lady Gaga. She has your classic mezzo soprano range and vocal colour and vocal timbre. Let's listen. And as I've mentioned many times before, the highest sitting mezzo soprano is Beyonce. Huge range, huge ability vocally in melisma and production and vocal colour and timbre and everything. She's called the Queen for a reason. She's a special singer. Okay, thank you very much for watching this episode for the mezzo soprano. Next time we'll look at the soprano voice, and it's unfortunately the last episode in the voice type series, and we'll be rounding that series out. So thank you for watching this episode, and goodbye.